What is going on, everyone? It is Connor, the co-host with the most, back with another Clutch Crew Sports 2022 College Football Conference Preview. You may be thinking to yourself, what's Connor doing here? This is Zach that usually does these videos. Well, yes, Zach is normally the one who does these videos, but for the remaining 4 videos, the Big Ten East, the Big 12, and the 2 SEC videos, I will be taking over doing these videos. So we are going to finish out the series. This one is coming out a little bit late. Just had to, because we had a little bit of a shift of things around. But we will be getting all of them out. This one will drop on Thursday, and then the Big 12 video will drop on Saturday, and then the 2 SEC videos will follow on the next couple of Saturdays. So we are going to get through these, but in this episode, we're going to be talking about the Big Ten East. Zach did the Big Ten West about a week and a half ago. So now we're going to be talking about the big boy division, the Big Ten East, where all the well-known schools are, all the well-known teams, the powerhouses of this conference. So let's get right into it. So at number 7, we're going to have the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Now, this is the school that, for all intents and purposes, no offense to Rutgers fans or anything like that, but this school really has kind of been a giant joke when it comes to teams in the Big Ten. It seems like they're always finishing in the cellar. They're always finishing last. They're not performing well. And, it's kind of like a running joke amongst us at the Clutch Crew Sports crew that, Rutgers should really give up their spot in the Big Ten to another team that deserves it more. Someone like, Boise State or Appalachian State, or, before it was announced they were going to go to the Big 12, Cincinnati Ucf, this team doesn't deserve to be in a Power 5 conference. But they managed to not finish in the cellar last year. They were 2-7 in the conference, 5-8 overall. Their conference wins, they had a couple of conference wins. They managed to break their streak of not winning a conference game last year. This year, they had 2 wins. Unfortunately, they were only against some of the lower teams. They beat Illinois and they beat Indiana. So no, big marquee wins. They did have a good game against Michigan. They were playing close with Michigan the whole time, but ultimately lost that game. And they still haven't won a home conference game in over 4 years. It's been a long time. So looking at their schedule here, if I had to pick out a key game for them, it really just has to be the game against Indiana at home. That's the most winnable conference game for them. Unfortunately for them, they have a really tough schedule. Because, not only do they have to play all the teams in the East, but from the West, they drew Iowa and Minnesota and Nebraska, which are 3 of the top 4 teams in that division, excluding Wisconsin. So definitely not an easy schedule for Rutgers here. So I don't really see that game against Indiana is possibly, for me, the only conference game I can see them winning this year. So I am going to do the same thing as Zach with the experience rank and all that. I'm kind of keeping the same format. So Rutgers, they were 4th out of these 7 teams in the experience rank, so kind of middle of the road, bringing back a good amount of players. Program status for Rutgers is finally getting some conference wins and working back to bowl eligibility. They actually were in a bowl game for the first time in quite some time last year in 2021. So even though they did finish 5-8, because of some of the weird things that were happening, normally you have to be 6-6 to get into a bowl game, but they were able to kind of sneak in as to one of those last few spots in the bowl games. So Rutgers was in a bowl last year, so it's just kind of working back towards that, because they're not going to have a winning season. They're not going to challenge for the conference title or anything like that. So for Rutgers, it's really just all about, getting a little bit more respectability, not being the joke of the Big Ten Conference like they so often are, and, just getting some wins under their belt. And, hopefully they can win a home conference game, since they haven't done that in a really long time. Key player for Rutgers is going to be their punter, Adam Korsak. Rutgers, they don't really have much going for them, but what they do have going for them is they have a top 3 special teams unit. Their punter is pretty much the best punter in the country, which, when you're a team like Rutgers that doesn't have a very good offense, it's really nice to have a good punter who can net you a lot of yards and flip the field. So, like I said, they have a really good punter. He's the leading candidate for the Ray Guy Award, which is given out to the best punter every year. Rutgers actually leads the nation in blocked kicks since 2009. They've blocked 55 kicks in that time. And they also have really good returners. So this is really the strength of this Rutgers team is going to be the special teams unit. And, that's going to have to help them out a lot if they want to have any chance of winning a lot of games this year. So at number 6, we have the Indiana Hoosiers. Now, this team obviously had a very disastrous season last year. They were 2-10, 0-9 in the conference, so they didn't win a single conference game. And there were a couple. Really the main reason behind that was they were shuffling quarterbacks all year long. They had like 4 different people take the reins at quarterback last year. So whenever you have something like that going on because of various injuries and poor play, nothing's going to turn out good. And it's a bit unfortunate for Indiana because they were, challenging Ohio State for the top of the Big Ten East in 2020. And then to come back and then, put up the performance they did in 2021 is just pretty embarrassing. So Indiana is definitely looking to rebound from that. Looking at their schedule here, they do have, of course, playing in the East, they have a tough schedule. They do have to play Cincinnati on the road, which is a bit unfortunate as well. That's probably going to be a loss right there. My key game for them is going to be at home against Purdue at the end of the season. That's a rivalry game. Both teams are in Indiana. It's not a rivalry game that happens. It's a rivalry game that happens every year. It's their protected rivalry from the West. So Indiana versus Purdue. And Purdue, they're a lot of a bit of a hit and miss team. So if Indiana can kind of get back to that form that they were in 2020, then I definitely think Indiana can take the win in this rivalry game this year. Obviously, they lost it last year, but they should be able to take the win this year if they can kind of get back to a little bit of that form they had last year. Because it's going to be tough for them to get wins in the conference. A lot of their winnable games are on the road. Against. They have a home game against Maryland, but at Nebraska, at Rutgers, that's going to be that was Rutgers' key game I had for them. So going to be interesting to see if Indiana can kind of get back to that form they had. So they also were 7th out of 7 in the experience ranks. So they have a lot of new starters on this team. This is a mostly brand new team. Program status for Indiana is going to be getting back to winning ways after disastrous 2021. They were on the up and up, and like I said, they were challenging for the Big Ten East in 2020. They just lost out to Ohio State. They lost a really close, fun game to Ohio State. I really thought Indiana was going to pull that out at one point, but unfortunately for them, it didn't happen. But it's really just about turning this program around, rebuilding. The key player for them is going to be quarterback Connor Bazelak. He is a transfer from Missouri. So, they lost their top quarterback after last season. And, the other 3 who took over the reins at some point last year, they all played at some point. They're all back this year, but Bazelak is supposed to be the starter. Like I said, he's coming in from Missouri. Missouri not exactly having the best, tenure going on while he was there. But, so he's not fantastic, but he definitely, has an opportunity to take the reins of now this is going to be his team. It's going to be his opportunity to shine, and, hopefully for his sake and the team's sake, Indiana can get some more wins this year. So in 5th, we're going to have the Maryland Terrapins. Maryland, they finished 5th in the conference last year as well. They were 3-6 in the conference, 7-6 overall. They started out the season really well. They actually started out the season 4-0, and everyone thought that, okay, this Maryland team is starting to get stuff turned around. And then, they went and lost a bunch of their last games. They lost 6 of their last 9 games and ended up where they were at. Maryland has definitely been a team that struggled a lot ever since they came to the Big Ten. At one point they were a bit of a powerhouse in the ACC, but ever since they've come to the Big Ten, they've been struggling. My key game for them is going to be at Penn State towards the end of the season. Looking at their schedule here, they do have a lot of winnable games. They have home against Purdue, at Indiana, home against Northwestern, home against Rutgers. So definitely a lot of winnable conference games there. But the key for me is going to be this game at Penn State. I think that's their most winnable game against one of the upper teams in this conference. Because winning games against Northwestern and Rutgers and Indiana, whatever. Those are Northwestern is not going to be very good this year. Indiana and Rutgers are not going to be very good this year. So, if they can get a win against one of these teams like Penn State or Wisconsin or someone like that, it's really going to go a long way for the program getting more respectability. So I have that game at Penn State because Penn State, they're bringing in a lot of new players this year. There's some people that have high expectations for Penn State. I'm kind of tampering my expectations for them just because, they're bringing in a lot of new players. So yeah, I know it's on the road, but it's definitely an opportunity for Maryland to get like a marquee conference win because that's kind of been their problem is winning against the better teams. So this Maryland team is second out of 7 teams in the experience rank, so they're bringing back a lot of players. The experience rank is very important. Bringing back a lot of starters, a lot of players. Having continuity in your program is very good. The program status for Maryland is getting over the ranked team hump after their first winning season since 2014. So what I mean by the ranked team hump is the fact that Maryland, they just can't seem to beat the ranked teams. That was one of their problems last season was that when they were getting those wins, when they were 4-0 at the beginning of the season, when they looked like they were going to be making a turnaround, then they ran into a ranked team. Like they ran into Penn State, they ran into Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, all these ranked teams, the upper class of teams, and they lost pretty bad to them. So it's definitely going to be key for Maryland to kind of, like I said, get over that hump and get a victory against one of those teams. Their key player is going to be wide receiver Rakeem Jarrett. Like I said, this is a top 10 wide receiver group, so it's going to be key for them to, get that offense going, get, big plays made because when you have a top 10 wide receiver group in the FBS, it's very important for you to be able to, get your offense going and, when you need to make drives at the end of games, these are the guys that you're going to be looking for. So definitely key for Maryland to have him and all the rest of their wide receivers. So at number 4, we're going to have the Penn State Nittany Lions. Now, Penn State, they definitely had a disappointing season last year. They were 7-6 in overall, 4-5 in the conference, and they started the year 5-0. I talked about how Maryland started the year 4-0. Penn State started the year 5-0, and they just completely fell apart towards the end of the year. Again, they just couldn't beat any of the big teams. They couldn't do it. It was some of them were close, some of them were not. It's just really disappointing season for Penn State. This is a team that every year expects to be competing for the division title and the conference title, for that matter. So for them to have the season like they had last year is definitely very disappointing for them. So their schedule this year, they definitely have some interesting games on here. They play on the road at Auburn early in the year, which Auburn is actually, they're not slated to be as good this year, so that could definitely be a big win for Penn State if they can go down and win at Auburn. Of course, they've got some of their easier games on here. They get to play at home against Ohio State, although they have to go on the road against Michigan. The key game that I have for them is going to be their last game of the season against Michigan State at home. There's a lot of people most people are expecting Michigan State to be the third best team in the conference. There are some people that are anticipating Penn State's going to be the third best team in the conference. So it's, I think that's definitely a key matchup for, which of these teams is going to be the third best team, possibly even fighting for the second best team, depending on what happens. Who knows what could happen there. So I definitely think this is going to be the key game for Penn State. Like, I don't anticipate them beating Michigan or Ohio State, but if they can get the win at home against Michigan State, that would definitely go a long way for, their just winning big games like that. It helps your recruiting, it helps your morale, it helps everything, really. So definitely a key game there for Penn State. So Penn State, like I mentioned earlier in the video, they're bringing in a lot of new people. They're going to be 6th out of 7 in the experience rank. Their program status is going to be recover from close 2021 losses, and they can get back to championship form. Like I said, this is a team that expects to be competing for the division title and the conference title every year. They still haven't made the college football playoff in its history, which is a bit surprising. They did have one year where they got completely robbed from the college football playoff. I've talked about this a lot where, it was between them and Ohio State basically, and then Penn State went and beat Ohio State and won the Big Ten championship, but Ohio State still got the spot over them, so they definitely did get robbed one season. But other than that, they haven't really been close per se to making the college football playoff, so it's definitely something they want to do. The key player for them is going to be quarterback Sean Clifford. He's the veteran quarterback at Penn State, and he's going to be leading a team with a lot of young players and a team that lost a lot of defensive players. This was one of the better defenses in the Big Ten last year, and they lost a lot of starters on defense. I think they're only bringing back 4 of their 11 starters on defense. So it's definitely a rebuilding defense, and the offense is going to have to take over this year because, if the defense can't win games for you, Clifford's going to have to do it, and he hasn't exactly proven in his career so far that he's, exactly the best QB for to lead Penn State to the promised land, ever since Trace McSorley left. So definitely going to be key for him to get off to a good start and help lead this Penn State team further through the season. So at number 3, we have the Michigan State Spartans. Michigan State, they were 3rd in the conference last year. Like I said, this is a very top-heavy division here with Penn State, and then, of course, the 3 teams, Michigan State and the 2 teams that are yet to come. Michigan State, they were 7-2 in the conference last year, 11-2 overall. They were the only team in the conference that beat Michigan last year, but unfortunately for them, they also had a loss to Ohio State and a loss to Purdue. So that kept them from, really competing for the division crown. Looking at their schedule here, their big non-conference game is going to be at Washington. Washington is figuring to be one of the better teams in the Pac-12 this year, so that's definitely going to be a good matchup for them, a good early test. See what kind of team they have this year. They get to play Wisconsin and Minnesota at home, which is an advantage. But of course, they have to go on the road against Michigan and against Penn State. The key game I have for them is going to be that October 8th matchup at home against Ohio State. And, this is really going to be the game for Michigan State. This is going to be, are we going to compete for the college football playoff, and are we going to compete for the division crown? And that's the game that's going to tell if they are or not. Because Ohio State, they're definitely one of the top teams in college football, and if they can get a win against Ohio State at home, that would go a long way for helping not only their college football playoff chances, but helping just to win the Big Ten. Because after that, like I said, they did beat Michigan last year, and Michigan is weaker this year. So if they can go into the Big House and beat Michigan after beating Ohio State, they have a really brutal stretch playing Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Michigan back-to-back. But if they can beat Ohio State, then I could see them beating Wisconsin and beating Michigan, and then, only go up from there. So definitely going to be key for Michigan State. That's really going to be the telltale game for them this season on how good they're going to be. So this team is first out of the 7 teams in the experience rank. They're bringing back a lot of starters this year. Most of the starters that they're bringing back are going to be on defense. They did lose a decent amount of offensive starters, but like I said, they're bringing back a lot of their starters on defense. Program status for Michigan State is going to be building off a strong 2021 and pushing for a Big Ten title. The key player for them is definitely going to be quarterback Peyton Thorne. Their offense last year completely ran through Kenneth Walker. He's in the NFL now. He's playing for the Seahawks. He was a Heisman candidate last year. I think he finished 3rd in Heisman voting behind Stroud and Bryce Young. But, it's definitely going to be up to him to carry the load for Michigan State now because, it's possible that they start transferring into a more pass-heavy offense. There's a lot of teams in college football that generally have 2 running backs. So that way when one leaves, it really opens up the door for, someone else to take the reins. But Walker was just so dominant last year that, no one else really got a large chunk of carries. So it's going to be an unknown offense for them. And Thorne being, he was the quarterback last year, he's going to have to, develop in year 2 and take this team further if Michigan State wants any chance to compete with Michigan and Ohio State in this division and possibly for a Big Ten championship. So at number 2, we have last year's division champs, the Michigan Wolverines. They were 8-1 in the conference, 12-2 overall last year. And, Michigan, they finally got over the hump. They finally made it into the college football playoff. Unfortunately for them, they had a pretty embarrassing loss to Georgia in the college football playoff, so that was a bit unfortunate for them. But this year is setting up really nice for them. I mean, they have a fairly easy schedule for the most part when it comes to the Big Ten. They do have to go on the road at Iowa, which is going to be tough, but, they get to play Penn State and Michigan State at home. They don't really have any hard non-conference games, and as always, of course, the key game for Michigan is going to be at the end of the year the game at Ohio State. You know, they got to play at the Big House last year, and they finally got that win over Ohio State, but now it's going to be turned around. Now they got to go to Columbus, and they got to go to the Horseshoe and, you know, play Ohio State in Ohio. So definitely by far the key game for them. And in all honesty, for the most part, it's probably, you know, like it has so many other times, that game's going to determine who wins the Big Ten East and who goes on to the Big Ten championship game against the likes of Wisconsin or Iowa, and potentially a spot in the college football playoff if, you know, Michigan can replicate the success they had last year. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. They did, you know, I'll get to that in a minute, but it's definitely going to be key for Michigan to, they need to go into that game against Ohio State without any other losses. You know, because if they go into that game with even one loss, then they're going to be really screwed if they lose. Like, they're probably going to be screwed if they lose anyway, but they're going to be really screwed if they lose if they go into that game with a loss. So I'm anticipating, like, it'd be a really big, high marquee matchup if both teams go into there undefeated in conference play like they did last year. You know, both teams went in. Michigan, unfortunately, they went in with one loss, but they were able to come out with a win because they did lose to Michigan State. But they were able to hand Ohio State that loss and take over the conference. So Michigan, they did lose quite a few starters from last year. They're going to be 5th out of 7 on the experience rank. The program status for Michigan is going to be, you know, they got their first win against Ohio State in 8 years, and to try and get this young group back to the college football playoff, it's going to be tougher this year. Like I said, they lost a lot of players. You know, they lost a lot of players to the draft. Aiden Hutchinson, of course, is the big one that they lost to the draft. You know, so they've got a bit of a retooled defense here. They only have 3 or 4 starters back on defense. The offense is in a little bit better hands, but not super fantastic. Their key player is going to be left tackle Ryan Hayes. If there is one major strength on this Michigan team, it's the offensive line. They have arguably the best offensive line in the FBS. You know, so that's going to be key. You know, Cade McNamara is also returning, so they still have their quarterback from last year, but Michigan was really heavily built on the run game last year as well. You know, they really torched Ohio State in the run game in that game at the Big House at the end of the season. So having a good offensive line is really going to help. You know, if there's one way that you can really help young players and a young offense, it's having a good offensive line. And Michigan, like I said, they have arguably the best one in the country, which is why a lot of people in my mind are still picking them to be really good. Because in my mind, if they didn't have this really good offensive line, I'd probably be picking them to finish 3rd or 4th in this division. But that offensive line can really do wonders for you. You know, open up holes for the running back, give Cade McNamara time to throw the ball. You know, he's got another year to develop and make better decisions. You know, he made some mistakes last year as a freshman, but now that he's had a year to develop, he should get better. And of course, in first, as they seem to find themselves a lot, the Ohio State Buckeyes. You know, they did finish 2nd in the division last year. They were 8-1 in the conference, 11-2 overall. Their only conference loss, of course, coming to Michigan at the end of the year. They also had a loss to Oregon earlier in the year that really cost them a spot in the college football playoff. Because in my mind, honestly, they might have still had a chance to make it even with the loss to Michigan had they not had the loss to Oregon. But the loss to Oregon really kind of sealed their fate after they lost that game to Michigan. Their key game, of course, is once again same as Michigan. It's going to be the game against Michigan at home. They do have a really tough early test week 1 of the season at home against Notre Dame. If I had to pick like a second key game for them, it would definitely be that one. Just because, you know, a matchup of top 5 teams, you know, you want to be the one that comes out on top in that group, in that game. Like, okay, you know, we're the players here. We're the team to beat. You know, Ohio State's ranked number 2 in the preseason poll behind only Alabama. So, you know, a lot of people are expecting them to be, you know, real college football national championship contenders. And that game against Notre Dame is definitely going to be an early sign of what we're going to see from Ohio State because, you know, for the most part, they, like I said, they get to play Wisconsin at home. They get to play Iowa at home. Their only real tough road game this year is going to be at Michigan State. They do have to go at Penn State, but that can kind of go either way depending on how Penn State turns out this year. So it's definitely advantageous for them. I think that game against Notre Dame is going to be in a neutral site. But it really could go either way for them depending on how it goes here. Like I said, Michigan State seems to be their only tough road game. They get to play Michigan at home. And, things are really setting up good for Ohio State to potentially make another run at the national title. They haven't won it since 2014. They missed out on the college football playoff last year for the first time in a couple seasons. So they're definitely looking to get back to the big dance. So Ohio State's going to be 3rd out of 7 in the experience rank. Their program status is, of course, getting back to the college football playoff and winning their first title. They're bringing back a lot of key people from that offense. C.J. Stroud, of course, is the biggest one. He was a Heisman candidate. He looked really good last year. There were some questions as to how well he was going to do. He was looking pretty shaky after that Oregon game, but he really turned everything around after that and looked like a Heisman candidate. They're bringing back Trayvon Henderson at running back, so they should have a very strong running game again. Their offense is really, it's the class of the Big Ten. It's hard to find any flaws in their offense this year. What's really going to determine how well they do this year is going to be the defense. That's why I have their key player as safety, Ronnie Hickman. He's the head of this defense. He should lead this defense. It's an improved defense. They've had another year to mature, get some players back. And, it's really, again, that's going to be the key to Ohio State's success this year, because the offense is going to put up points. But the defense is what let them down last year. It's what let them down in the game against Michigan. And the defense is really going to determine how far Ohio State goes this year. Like I said, they're challenging for having the best team in the league. It's kind of between them and Alabama right now as to who's got the best team. But it's going to be interesting to watch. And, of course, there's always going to be Michigan standing in their way. And Ohio State's looking to get back on another long winning streak against their arch rivals. So thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you leave down in the comments below what you think about this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. This is my first crack at a college football video. I, put a lot of research into this because I'm not the biggest college football fan. So I got the same magazine that Zach had that he was getting all of his stats and figures from. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, make sure you leave down in the comments below whether you agree with my rankings, disagree with my rankings. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the bell to get notified for all our future videos. And until then, I will see you guys next time.